welcome back to another episode of Film Facts Stats. We are a notch above your group chat. I'm Jack Coyle, and I am joined by my co-host Mason Wood, football editor for Back Sports Page, as well as a contributor to Shy City Sports. Mason, how are we doing tonight?
Not too bad. Ready to talk about some. We got some bowl games to look forward to, and also the NFL season's down to the final 3 weeks. I'm sad because we're running out of time to place all of our bets, but hey, ready to get talking.
Absolutely, brother. And we also have Freddie Freeman. Freddie is a professional handicapper, a film aficionado, and our resident NFL expert. Freddie, what are we going to be talking about tonight?
Yeah, so I'm actually moving more to college now, looking at the NFL draft. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the quarterback prospects. I myself am happy that the NFL season is almost over. I've hated the 2023 season. We've spoken about that before, but enough said. Let's jump on in.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to some of those the QB prospect breakdown there. I know you were watching some film earlier. All right, great. Well, let's jump right in. So, it is actually National Early Signing Day today, and most signees have landed where they were expected to, but we did have a couple of big flips in the last couple hours. So, Dylan Raiola, who we spoke about last show, has officially committed to Nebraska, which is a big flip from his commitment to Georgia. It's a huge get for that program. But now, probably the biggest flip of the day so far is his actual high school teammate, KJ Bolden, the top ranked safety, has flipped from FSU to Georgia. He has signed with Georgia. He is going to be a Bulldog. Probably the biggest flip we've seen so far today, although we have also seen Jeremiah McClellan, wide receiver, verbally committed to Ohio State, flip to Oregon. So a couple big flips there. Now we did have a few major signees land where they were originally committed. That includes Jeremiah Smith, the number one overall player in the country for the 2024 class, is going to be a wide receiver. He has signed for Ohio State. There was some discussion earlier about him flipping to Miami and Florida State, who had a big push earlier. Now, Mason, we've had a couple really big signings today. Who to you stands out? Is there anybody in particular that you're really looking forward to watching next year?
I will say I did a little bit more research on some of the Dylan Raiola stuff, and one thing I didn't know, one thing I didn't pay attention to, because I didn't pay as much attention to, especially I'd say the last 2 years, the Arizona high school football team. But Raiola actually played. I can't remember what school, but he played out here originally, and he ended
He
up
did.
transferring to a school in Texas or something like that, which I thought was kind of interesting. So, just an interesting tidbit there. He was actually like one of our top prospects here at a certain point, which is as cool as that is. I'd like to also point out that our most highly coveted prospect at one point was Spencer Rattler, and that has not gone far. So who knows how this works out for Dylan Raiola, but I'm really interested to see where that goes for sure.
All right, moving on. Like you mentioned earlier, Mason, we've got some exciting bowl matchups both this week and going into the weekend. So we've got Thursday is University of South Florida versus Syracuse in the Boca Raton Bowl. Friday we have Georgia Tech versus UCF in the Gasparilla Bowl at 6:30 on ESPN. And Saturday we have a whole slate of games. There's one in particular I'm excited about, and that is Air Force versus James Madison in the Armed Forces Bowl. Now, the Armed Forces Bowl has so many storylines that it almost sounds unbelievable. So, James Madison is favored by -2.5 in what's expected to be a pretty low scoring affair. Jordan McLeod, the star quarterback for James Madison this year, who threw for 3,400 yards and 32 touchdowns, has entered the transfer portal. However, he says that he will play in the bowl game. That's still kind of up in the air. Missing him would definitely hurt, but missing James Carpenter, Mikhail Kamara, Aiden Fisher, and Jalen Walker is going to hurt them even more. Those are all of their defensive players that have entered the portal. Now, those players are also still expected to play, but that's going to be kind of a game time decision. Now, how passionately will they play, even if they do play? I don't know. Another storyline about this game, JMU has lost 8 coaches. Kurt Yeti left for Indiana, and he brought 7 assistants with him. They had to hire 5 temporary coaches just to get to the bowl game. So now Bob Chesney from Holy Cross will step in, and he's a very good coach who's had a lot of success at the FCS level. But they've got to replace 8 coaches for the bowl game. That's insane. So who's going to win the game? Air Force runs for 275 yards a game, and they run the ball on 86.8% of their plays, right? They run the veer offense. JMU allows only 61 yards on the ground per game, the number one in the FBS. In a non-bowl game without all of these crazy variables, stopping the run would be the difference in this game. But Chesney being introduced to a new team with new coordinators on both sides of the ball, while half of the team has 1 foot out the door, I I just simply don't think that JMU can outskill Air Force. I just don't think they can do it. So I'm going to take Air Force plus 2.5. That being said, if you're not super comfortable with that pick, under 41.5 is going to be a safe bet for that game. Mason, would love to hear your thoughts on the Armed Forces Bowl.
Yeah, I've been really high on JMU pretty much all year, and there was the week that they got their first loss, they specifically really let me down because I had a parlay on them. But I will say that I liked a lot of the points that you made, and I think that to your point, this is going to be a very, very good football game. Maybe not. Let me rephrase. I don't know if it's going to be good football, but it's going to be a competitive game towards the end. Let me say that. So it's going to be a good game, though. It's going to be a close game towards the end, so that it's going to be one that you're going to be wanting to watch. It's going to be right around the over/under mark as well. So this is going to be an interesting one for sure. But I like your point as well. I think it's going to be tough for JMU. However, I disagree. I think JMU pulls it off. So I would take JMU to. I wouldn't take them to cover 2.5. 2.5 is, as much as it's not that much, it does scare me a little bit. But CBS has them at -1. So if I can find a line where they're at -1, give me that. But at 2.5, I don't know.
Fair. Looking forward to the game, man. I think it's going to be a good one. And Mason, to you for your mandates. That's all I got today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So I wanted to go over kind of one of the games that I'm looking forward to this upcoming Saturday, that one being the Utah versus Northwestern game. Now, this one, the spread is a little heavy. It's got Utah in favor at -6.5. However, when you take a look at this, Utah has been kind of they didn't finish their season as well as they wanted to. They were a team that easily could have been involved in some of the playoff talks and stuff like that, but basically got outraced by their fellow Pac-12 opponents. They ended up losing along the stretch to Oregon pretty badly. Then they ended up crushing ASU. And then you look at 2 losses to Washington and Arizona, who are both quality teams. However, that loss to Arizona, they weren't really involved in it. And then they played Colorado the very next week, and that one was a close game. So just not the year that the Utes wanted to have. Now, on the other side of things in Northwestern, right, they ended up beating Maryland towards the bottom of the stretch. And then they lost to Iowa, which I'll give them a pass in the loss to Iowa. However, they only scored 7 points on that Iowa defense. One more touchdown would have been great. Northwestern also ended up beating Wisconsin, Purdue, and Illinois the following 3 weeks. So they were on a real high point coming off the end of the season with 3 back-to-back wins, while Utah kind of felt like they didn't show enough. So I feel like this game's going to be one of those games where Utah feels like they've got a lot that they need to show, and then you compare that with Northwestern, who just feels like they're on a high. This feels like 2 teams that are going to clash, and they're going to clash well. I'm looking forward to it. Utah, their final game in the Pac-12. And Northwestern was one of the top teams in the Big Ten. Are they in the Big Ten East? I want to say, is it the Big Ten East that they're in?
I'll have to check. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, because they definitely weren't one of the best teams in the Big Ten, but they were one of the best teams in their conference or in their respective side of the conference with that featured Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Purdue, Illinois, Minnesota. So this is going to be a tough matchup for them, but I really like it compared to Utah. Okay. Not to mention, this game is at under 41.5. I actually really like to take this one high. Both of these offenses have been scoring a ton of points, and if either of them score about what they've scored in the last 5 weeks, then this is an easy hit on the over. So I do like that as well. I would definitely take the over on this game if I were you. So the next, there's plenty of bowl games this Saturday. Make sure you're checking them out if you can. I also wanted to talk about our most anticipated midweek game. Now, there's a few midweek games next week following up on Christmas. That's starting on Tuesday, December 26th. You've got Bowling Green, Minnesota, Texas State Rice, and Kansas versus UNLV all on that day. Wednesday, December 27th features Virginia Tech and Tulane, North Carolina versus West Virginia, Louisville versus USC, Texas A&M versus Oklahoma State. There's also a few games on Thursday as well, featuring teams like SMU versus Boston College, Rutgers versus Miami, NC State versus Kansas State, and Arizona versus Oklahoma. Now, I'm not counting Friday because I'm one of those people that I kind of consider Friday to be a part of the weekend. So, looking at the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday games, I want to know, Jack, do you have a most anticipated game out of all of those games?
Oh man, I don't know. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Tulane puts on the field without Michael Pratt. So I that's probably my most anticipated game of next week is just seeing exactly what Tulane puts together.
I said it last week. I'm really looking forward to that Kansas UNLV game. I think it's going to be a good game, and I think that it's going to be competitive. And I think if you're a better, you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be a late night Wednesday night game, so that one will be, or a late night Tuesday game, excuse me. So I think that one will be good. The other one I'm looking forward to as well is Arizona versus Oklahoma. I think that this is a real test for Arizona, where they've had some really good wins, but I feel like they haven't. I don't know. This is a statement win for them. This is a really good way for them to cap off a really good season for them, and they haven't had a good season like this in a long time. So I think there's a lot at stake there for Arizona, and I think that there's also a lot at stake there for Oklahoma as well because they have a lot of expectations over at that school as well. So there's a lot at stake between these two schools. It's a Thursday night game. I don't know who plays in the NFL that week, but this game might even be better. It's at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio at 9:15 p.m. on ESPN. That is Thursday, December 28th.
That's going to be a fantastic game, man. And that would mean so much to Arizona to, beat a blue blood in a night game like that. I think it would be a huge for Arizona. It'd be huge for Arizona recruiting. That's going to be an awesome game, and it would mean a lot to the program if they can pull that win off.
Absolutely. To your point, a lot of their games this year that they had some of those upsets were kind of stuck on Pac-12 network and stuff like that. So they weren't as visible to audiences. This is kind of one of their first times. I feel like that they're in prime time. They're on one of these mega sports channels. So we're going to get an opportunity to really see them shine bright. And I think that they're going to know that and really take advantage of that. I'd also like to take a look. I didn't check. The spread for this game is about -3 towards Arizona. You're looking at over 62.5, which I don't hate this number. These are two high-powered offenses, but you're anticipating a very specific game if that's the case. So it's got to be a high-scoring game for you if you're going to take the over on this one. But that is probably my most anticipated midweek matchup next week. Now,
100%.
heading into my final point, I was going to talk a little bit on Caleb Williams, but I am going to save those points because I'm sure Freddie has some things he's going to want to talk about with Caleb Williams. Now, my last point, I wanted to talk about the Cleveland Browns. Now, I've mentioned it before. The NFL is getting to that point right now where we are down to the final 3 weeks of the year. The standings are tight, and that's on both the AFC and the NFC side. But one thing I wanted to bring up, how plausible it is for the Cleveland Browns to possibly walk out of here entering the playoffs with a 3 seed, and that is without their main starting quarterback. Now, the Browns right now are 9-5. They're 7-1 at home. Just an interesting stat there. 7-1 at home. They've been 2-4 on the road, so they've struggled on the road. However, they've won 2 straight games, going from 7-5 to 9-5. Now, some of the other teams that they're going to be competing with for some of those top seeds, you obviously have the Dolphins, who are 10-4. Now, the Dolphins' schedule doesn't look favorable. You got the Cowboys, the Ravens, and the Bills. I mean, that is probably the worst final 3 games you could ever ask for, especially considering you're going to get the Cowboys coming off this horrible week that they just had, and then you're going to get the Bills, who at that point are still probably going to be fighting for a playoff spot. Now, other teams that they're going to be competing against, the Chiefs are 9-5, so they are kind of right there with the Browns. The Chiefs, however, I believe that they're going to have a strong end to the year. They're playing the Raiders, the Bengals, and the Chargers, so it's not going to be the toughest schedule. It's very easy that the Chiefs completely win out here. Now, where things get tough is the Ravens. Now, the Ravens are 11-3 right now. They lead the division. They've got a nice lead over the Browns. However, the Ravens and the 49ers are playing this weekend. Then the Ravens follow that up with a game against the Dolphins. It's a short week, technically, because that Ravens 49ers game is on a Monday night. And then at the end of the season, they play the Steelers, who at that point are probably going to be, right at 500. They're going to need that one win to secure Mike Tomlin's job. And we all know how this storyline is going to go. I feel like we've seen it like 3 or 4 times in the last 8 years where they're going to play each other the final week. It's going to be all the hopes and prayers. Will the Steelers make the playoff spot? All this stupid stuff that isn't going to amount to anything because the Steelers are going to end up losing in the wild card round if they make it anyways. So it doesn't really matter. That being said, The only other team that I really think is competing with, there's not really another team that's competing up there. I mean, maybe the Jaguars, maybe the Colts, but the Jaguars are on a 3-game losing streak, and I do not think the Colts are a top 3 seed. So, and that goes with the Texans as well, who right now we don't know when CJ Stroud is returning, who's out with a concussion right now. So that one is a little bit of a struggle as well. The Broncos aren't going to come out of nowhere unless the Browns, completely fold. And I didn't even mention the fact that the Browns' upcoming schedule, Texans, Jets, Bengals, all winnable games for them. It's very plausible that the Cleveland Browns win out here. They wrap up their season 12-5, win the division, and end up as a top 3 seed. What's also very plausible is they lose these next 3 games and they miss out on the playoffs entirely. But my biggest scenario that I think is going to happen, I think they're going to end up with, probably a top. It's tough. I don't really know what they're going to end up with. I'm kind of right now, just in case anybody's wondering, I'm kind of right in between on the Ravens. I've never bought into the Ravens over the last few years, despite everybody else kind of having done so. This is the first year where I'm kind of like, okay, I kind of want to buy in. They've shown up week in and week out. So I think this week will kind of be the week where I'm really going to be able to tell you whether or not I think the Browns are going to step up and take it away. So we'll talk about this. We'll touch on it again next week. But before we do that, I want to ask both Jack and Freddie here their opinions on whether or not the Browns are going to be a top 3 seed, whether or not the Ravens are going to win the division. We'll start with you, Jack. Go right ahead.
Yeah, honestly, man, I am in a similar boat with you and the Ravens, where, however, I think that this is the best team we've seen come out of there in the last couple of years. If that receiver play can just improve, man, if they can just catch the ball, I think that the Ravens are right there. Man, they're right there. So I'd really like to see the Ravens clinch that division. At the same time, I'd love to see Joe Flacco make his way into the playoffs again. It'd be a great story. And I am not going to count him out. So again, to your point, anything could happen right now, really. We'll see how it goes. I am not counting the Browns out at all. I would not at all be surprised if they sneak their way in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna echo a lot of the thoughts both of you shared. Someone who grew up in Baltimore. I obviously used to be a Ravens fan. I'm a little bit extra nitpicky when it comes to them. Lamar did not have his best game last week. He threw one pick. It could have been 2 easily, but they do also really have a tough schedule. You look at the Browns. Flacco is not playing good football. Most of the time he is, but he makes a couple mistakes. The Bears defense did a good job against him. So did the few teams before that. But that Cleveland team is more about the defense, and they really have a path to the 1 seed because the Dolphins, as you mentioned, have a tough schedule. If they lose one game but still beat the Ravens, well, now they have the same record as the Browns if they win out, and the Browns have that conference tiebreaker, and then the Chiefs, if they end with, I believe the Chiefs have that conference tiebreaker over the Browns, but the Chiefs are not playing good football. I mean, last week was way closer than it should have been with the Patriots. So the Chiefs also have a very easy schedule and could win out, but there's a possibility that the Browns end up with the 1 seed or the 2 seed. And I don't think anyone from the AFC South, the Jags, Colts, Texans, we might see 2 of those teams, even 3 of those teams in the playoffs, but no one's really vying for that 1 seed. They're all sitting there at 8 and 6. So yeah, definitely very interesting. I think next week we'll be able to have a lot more focused discussion about how everything's shaking up. But yeah.
Absolutely. It's one of those things we're going to have a ton more clarity next week, but I like the point you made about, the Chiefs end of season schedule and kind of how they've played the last few weeks, because it feels like one of those games is kind of one that they're going to give away at some point, and that's going to come back to really bite them, because if the Browns end up winning out on what is one of the easier schedules to finish out the year, then they're going to be in big trouble. So it's going to be one of those things, as you said, we'll have to take a look at it again next week. And, we'll really know after these upcoming games this weekend, which it sounds crazy to say, we'll really know who these teams are after these upcoming games, 16 weeks into the damn season. But that's kind of the way the NFL season works. And that's just football, baby. So with that being said, those are all of my mandates for the evening. So we're going to move it right along over to Freddie.
Thank you for that. And that actually leads exactly into why I'm not talking about the NFL tonight. There's nothing new to say about any team around the league. They've not shown us anything new really the last few weeks. But we were just talking about something, cleaning up some loose ends. We've said everything there is to be said about all of these teams. No one's playing good football. We looked at all these different units, the coaching staffs, everything. We've been around the NFL. There's nothing new to talk about. So I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to look at the quarterback class that is highly touted around the league. And I'm going to break them up into 3 groups of 2 just because it's fun. And then I'll talk
Yeah.
more about them. So we have the top 2, we have the dancers, and we have the questionables.
Ooh, I'm very
Now,
excited for this, Freddie. I just gotta say, before we get started, I'm very anticipating this. So go ahead, kick us off. Let's hear the groups.
awesome. And feel free to jump in about any particular player. I know, Mason, you particularly have some thoughts on Caleb Williams, but any particular player, feel free to jump in. So the top 2 are Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels.
Okay.
These A lot of people, you're going to hear a lot about Caleb Williams and Drake May, and I'm going to talk about those guys. But Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels are the 2 most polished guys. Bo Nix has very, very solid mechanics, fantastic accuracy. He doesn't have a lot of experience with progressions, but he stays calm under pressure. He's decent athleticism. He can put the ball anywhere on the field, solid arm strength, and he got better as the season went on. Now, this is just a cursory look at these guys. I didn't go through and nitpick their film, look at this, that, the other. Cursory look. Bo Nix reminds me a decent amount of Trevor Lawrence. He's a very safe pick, and he can come in and do some great things in the NFL. So I have him and Jaden Daniels are going to have to separate themselves in the pre-draft process because Jaden Daniels is very athletic. He won the Heisman. He's a little bit lean in his lower body, which is concerning, but he also has good accuracy. He can put the ball anywhere in the field. He's comparatively advanced with progressions when you look at him and Bo Nix, but he makes a couple more questionable decisions than Bo Nix. So it's a little bit of what kind of offense do you want to run? What things do you think you can coach out of these guys? But these 2 are the top guys to me, and those fit in my top 2 categories. So before moving on, what are your thoughts on these guys?
I think that is a great pick, Freddie. And we'll get into this a little bit more when we get into the 2 guys that are, I'd say, well, we should get this out of the way. First of all, is that who's touted as the 2 best picks is we've heard all year it's Caleb Williams and Drake May. That's all we've heard all year is that they're the top 2. So I love that you've swapped it up because Jaden Daniels is just not getting the respect he deserves. The numbers that he put up this year, the stats that he put up this year, the wins that he had against some of those tough teams, absolutely he deserves to be in the top 2 discussion. Now, same with Bo Nix. Now, I have a little bit difficult feeling about Bo Nix because he's been in the NCAA for so long. I agree that he is a step above the rest of those players, and that's because he should be. He's been playing ball. He's what, 24, but he should be that developed. But I think that that's a really good sign for him. I love the Trevor Lawrence comparison, which is a comparison I've also heard made to Drake May, but I don't really agree with it. Now, I much prefer that comparison completely to Bo Nix. I agree. I think that he does make a strong starter in the NFL. Mason, what are your thoughts, my friend?
No, I agree with both of those points. Look, I've been very high on Jaden Daniels for a long time. Not to say that I have a bias for guys that I, have seen in person, have personal connections to in a sense, because look, when Brock Purdy was going to get drafted, I did not understand. This was also before I started kind of really doing the analytics stuff and really sitting down doing some of the podcast stuff. But I was really confused on why teams were not more highly touted on a guy like Brock Purdy, who showed a lot of really good tangibles that could be translated into the NFL. And all of those things that I really liked about Brock have all translated into the reason why he's even in MVP conversations entering week 16 of the NFL season. So that being said, I think very highly of Jaden Daniels. I got to see him the entire 2019 season, which I believe was his freshman year over at ASU. And he has grown so much from that freshman year. He's a completely different player. Obviously, he competes for a completely different team, but he is not the same player that he once was. To see what he's become has been something very special. And it's another one of those cases where obviously not to the same extreme. He's probably, I think he's projected like kind of second round right now, last time I looked. But he does feel like a guy that easily should be inside that top 20 and should be looked at amongst some of these other prospects. And when it comes to guys like Caleb Williams, Caleb Williams, I think over the last few weeks has just shown a lot of immaturity in a lot of these franchises that are in need of a quarterback that are inside the top 10. they are looking for guys that are going to bring maturity to that position. And it feels like Caleb Williams has shown teams everything you don't want to show teams in your senior year of high school. He's shown a lot of good, but he's also shown a lot of bad and some of that off the field stuff. And that's why I've kind of turned off from him. And as as a Bears fan, I'd rather keep Justin Fields rather than pick up Caleb Williams. And if they said, you know what, we took Jaden Daniels, I'd almost be like, okay, we took Justin Fields 2.0 technically, but in a sense, I do like Jaden Daniels a lot coming out of the draft, and I'm a big fan of his for sure. And I like Bo Nix as well. I don't know if I'd say I like him better than Drake May. I'm very high on Drake May so far and everything that I've seen, but Bo Nix is a highly touted prospect who kind of got lost in the shuffle this year and deserves to have a little bit more respect on his name for sure.
Awesome. I mean, I think you guys bring up a lot of great points. And before I get into my next two, if you guys want to sound off on Caleb Williams, because I know you guys definitely have some thoughts. He's had a lot of connections with the Bears. So, Mason, we can start back with you, and then Jack, and then I'll jump in.
I think it's just important to understand, you know, there are certain things, there are certain qualities that you need in an NFL quarterback, and he has all of the physical stuff, but it's some of that, and it's not to say off the field stuff is in like he's a big partier or stuff like that, but it just feels like there is just something that just he's not the leader that I would want behind my team. And I feel like over the last few weeks, especially on the Bears side of things, you've seen Justin Fields really step up. You've seen guys really talk about him being a leader and stuff like that. And obviously they've had their struggles, but everybody that's been there has been talking about how much of a leader he is, which is one of those things that I think Caleb Williams struggles with the most. I think if anything, that's going to really tank his draft. Not tank. Let me rephrase. That's going to hurt his draft stock. It's not going to tank him. He's not going to fall outside the top 10, nor is he going to probably fall outside the top 5. However, I feel like there's we're kind of in line for a guy to kind of get drafted ahead of him and for it to be this big storyline and stuff like that that really ends up not being a big storyline at all. So I'm not that high on Caleb Williams, but I think he's kind of a guy that he's got a lot of talent, and with the right organization, he could be something good. But I can tell you right now, the Chicago Bears organization is the last place that man should be anywhere near. Because I mean, if who was he crying like he was on the sideline crying after they lost to who? Because like that's going to be him every week playing as a Bears quarterback.
I want to say Utah, but that doesn't sound right.
Notre Dame, maybe?
No, it wasn't Notre Dame. I was at that game.
But either way, right? He's had those moments where it's passion and stuff like that, but at the same time, it's something that these franchises are going to look at, especially because he's not getting drafted to. He ain't getting drafted to the 49ers. He's not getting drafted to this, well done organization. He's going to go to an organization that needs help, that's raw, that probably a franchise that probably needs saving. He's meant to be the franchise saver, and don't be surprised if in a few years we're having similar talks that people are having about Trevor Lawrence right now, which is, what are these Kyler Murray-esque stats that don't look that great? That's basically the level of play we've seen out of Trevor Lawrence, despite just that's what it feels like Caleb Williams is heading, is a highly touted prospect that in 3 years he's got 25 touchdowns, 11 picks, and we're wondering why there's not more.
Yeah, absolutely, Mason. I'm going to echo a couple of those points. The first, and I think the most important, is what you said about him not going to a good team. He is not going to play for the 49ers. He's not going to play for the Ravens. He's not going to play for any team that is an established, likely to be. He probably will not have a winning season his first season in the league. Right now, we've seen that he cannot lose over this past season, really. And there's a couple concerns here. He is absolutely an incredibly talented prospect. I love the way that he's comfortable in the pocket. And even when the pocket breaks down, he tries to stay within the pocket for the most part. He does scramble when he needs to. His deep balls are a little concerning this year. If he didn't have Brendan Rice and some of those other receivers, a couple times he threw up 50-50 balls and they just came down with it. That being said, he can make every throw on the field. He's a great scrambler and unbelievable at making plays. But when we saw him play against those tougher defenses, Notre Dame, I was at that game, he completely fell apart. 3 interceptions, a couple fumbles. Now, that was mostly his offensive line's fault, But when you're not being propped up by great receivers and you're facing a stellar defense, which he's going to face a really good defense pretty much every single week in the NFL, I just don't see him having that continued success. And I think all of this makes sense when you contextualize it from Caleb Williams' life. So if you guys didn't know, pretty much he has been project be the number one quarterback since he was a child. He has been sent to schools. I think he was 14 years old as a freshman. He was staying by himself in the DC area to play football, right? So his entire life, it has been this trajectory of you're going to be the number one draft pick as a quarterback. And he's clearly talented. But I think if you're told that you're God's gift to the world your entire life, then when you start losing, you can't handle it. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. I don't think he's got the psyche. I just think it's this weird experiment almost of, can you raise a kid to be a quarterback? And I don't think you can.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know if Brady was raised the way he is, or there's a switch in his head. He's born different,
Right.
and built himself different. Yeah. I definitely have a lot less to say than both of you. And it comes down to one point and why he's one of my dancers. And I called him the dancer. So this is my generation. Have you guys are also my generation, but for listeners, have you guys seen Good Luck Charlie? Disney Channel.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the father in that show, I'm not going to talk too much about that show, but the father in that show played high school football. His character did. And his high school football coach had him take ballet. And when I watch Caleb Williams play, I'm like, did he take ballet? He spins so much. It is ridiculous. He's way too creative. You were talking about that, how he can scramble. He's way too creative, and that's my main problem with him. And when he's creative, it reminds you of Mahomes, how he moves, how he gets out of the pocket, does all these things. But then it's kind of like 50-50. He makes some really bad decisions when he's creative. Yep. So his floor is like on the sales floor of Trader Joe's, but his ceiling is Mahomes. So there's a huge question mark where Caleb Williams is, and that's why, to me, I have Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels above that. And my second dancer, depending on the team, but he's probably above Caleb Williams too, and I'll get to that in a second. But I mean, Caleb, that's my main problem. There's obviously more to be said, but yeah, he can do everything. Crazy ceiling, no floor.
Might I add, Patrick Mahomes coming out of college, right? That was one of the biggest concerns, was his, he could create like crazy, but it was how he used it, and he was reckless with it. It was something John Gruden hammered home with him. So it's one of those things that, to your point, Freddie, if he can clean that up, who knows what he can become, but he has to clean that up. And so, like you said, Mahomes' ceiling, but he has to be able to reach it.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's, it's one of those things. It's if that's just how the brain flows for Caleb Williams, then it's going to be really difficult to change, but it's possible. So that's going to depend on meetings and how those things go.
I think a big point also is who's his coach. I want to echo what Mason said. I hope he doesn't come to Chicago, not just because I'm a Chicago fan, but they would ruin him. The Bears would ruin any talent he has. So
we're already coaching staff on number 2. Yeah. The Bears are on number 2. The second quarterback they've ruined. You can argue Mitch Trubisky was never going to be good in the first place, but I think he never had a fair chance anyways. And then now Justin Fields. I mean, if they trade him at the end of this year, that's going to be the talk. It's going to be 2 straight quarterbacks that they've ruined, and now they're going to go for a third. You do not want that on your plate for both sides, for both Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears. The third time will not be the charm. He is not their guy.
Right. Yeah. So, Freddie.
Yeah. The second dancer, Michael Penix. He is a guy who I think is going to be probably the third overall guy, depending on the meetings and the pre-draft process. But I call him a dancer because you want to bounce in the pocket. This guy dances. It's as simple as it's like a new wave of dancing for his new wave offense that they run there in Washington, right? Washington. I don't pay attention too much to the teams, but okay. So, yeah, I mean, this dude doesn't ever stop moving, and it creates a lot of inefficiencies in his mechanics. So a lot of his sloppy play, a lot of his inconsistent play, he can make a ton of throws. He kind of reminds you of Tua, not just because he's left-handed, not just because they run similar offense, but he can really drive the ball. He probably has a better deep ball than Tua, but he's very inconsistent with his deep ball and with a lot of his throws, his accuracy, because he doesn't have consistent mechanics. So I actually pair him with Frank Smith, the current Dolphins offensive coordinator. I think that wherever Frank Smith goes, they're going to have a special interest in Michael Penix. But that's sort of future talk. We could leave that off the table. But yeah, I mean, this guy's athletic. He has good arm strength. He was already in a sort of a new wave NFL system. He just needs to clean his footwork up and work on a couple of small things. But thoughts?
You hit the nail on the head, man. I don't think I could say it any better. Is particularly his footwork and his throwing motion he's got to clean that up. I don't know what it is. It's this weird sidearm left-handed janky thing, and I think that part of that leads to the inconsistencies. Is if you don't have that, that framework and that great footwork and the great mechanics, then you're gonna be inconsistent. I'm 100% with you, Freddie. I would probably take him. Yeah, he's probably third on my board. I'd probably go Bo, Drake, Penix is my current three. I'd take Drake over him, but I do think he's a solid player. Clean those mechanics up, he'll do something special. Mason, what do you think about Penix?
I agree with the both of you completely. I think a lot of it is the mechanics that he has to kind of clean up, and it's again one of those things where with the right coaches, he's going to easily be able to clean that up to his advantage. He's probably going to get taken, mid to late first, early second round. He may go to a team that's a little bit more established, and it may play into his hand a little bit to be able to have that sort of advantage over a guy like Caleb Williams. That's why, in my opinion, it's not always the best to be the number one overall quarterback. If you end up going as the third or the fourth quarterback, you may have a much more successful career on a much nicer team. So it's kind of 50-50 there. But I do think I agree with both of you that Penix really needs to clean up a lot of those mechanics. And with the right team, he can definitely be a solid NFL starter.
Okay. Are we ready for the questionables?
Let's hear it.
Okay. Now, I'm going to attack Drake May. And he is either 5 or 6 on my list, depending on the pre-draft process. And before I go into that, I want to give a little bit of my resume on this. I had Justin Fields as an end of first round guy, just in case he wanted a 5th-year option. I had Will Levis outside of the first round. ESPN had him greater than 99.9% chance in the first round. I said, this guy's not a first-round pick. People are like, he's a first-round pick leading up to the draft. I went back to the film. He's not a first-round pick. A couple weeks later, had to come back to the film. No, I don't know what they're talking about. A bunch of GMs agreed with me. It doesn't mean I'm always right. I make mistakes all the time. We can have a separate podcast about that. But when it comes to quarterbacks, Drake May gives me Will Levis vibes. He has below average pocket awareness. He grounds way too many throws, missing short, not just under pressure getting rid of the ball. His accuracy fails him multiple times per game. He's shown the ability to read the field, but he usually locks into his first read. He throws some nice deep balls, but it actually gets away from him on them. He has decent athleticism, average arm talent. He particularly struggles to see the defense when he's escaping pressure, so he also really struggles to get creative. He makes a lot of mistakes that way, and he plays the game with it's like he has a taut, like nervous, anxious body, and that affects his mechanics. So when I see this guy, I see this Will Levis guy. His physicals, fantastic. Okay, well, we'll leave some other position comparisons, some outside of position comparisons out of the conversation right now. But he has almost no floor because his mechanics aren't great. His physicals are good, but he's sort of all over the field in his production. And I'm not a fan of that. I think he could be a first-round pick. Some team wants to have the 5th-year option on the table. But this guy does not, in my book, have first-round film at all. What are your thoughts? I know you guys both already said you have him very high on your board, so I'm very excited to hear why.
Well,
Jack, I'll let you begin.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead. My biggest thing with Drake May, which is like what you said, Freddie, is his measurables. Guy's 6'4", 200 something pounds. He can throw the ball, but most importantly, when he moves, that's a hard force to run. I really like the Will Levis comparison because though he's not necessarily a mobile quarterback, he's going to be hard to move. My biggest concern with Drake May is he hasn't played anybody. The hardest competition that he's played against in college was Clemson. Now, Clemson's a really good program. They're not Alabama. They're not Georgia. He hasn't had to play against those top tier defenders. And when he has, let's say, what was it, 2022, they lost to Oregon. The year before that, they lost to Notre Dame. They barely beat Duke this year. They lost to Clemson, like I mentioned. They lost to North Carolina State. They haven't beat a team that was difficult to beat. He won every game he was supposed to. I don't know if that's going to stand up in the NFL. I do like him better than, like I said, Penix and Caleb Williams, just based off what I have seen, particularly in the deep ball. I really like his deep ball, and I think he would make a really good pro style quarterback. My only questionable for Drake May is, can he play against that top level? Because we haven't seen it yet. That's how I'm feeling about Drake May. Mason?
No, that's fair. To your point, it's going to be a very large jump. It's the same thing that when you see those guys from a Division II college, they come up to the NFL. It's a huge jump. You're basically skipping an entire division. Now that being said, I've been a big fan of Drake May. However, this year kind of did squander it a little bit. All right, this year he was a little bit less consistent. He didn't have as good of a year as he did the year prior, and so that kind of affected things slightly. And when I look at Drake May, the biggest thing with him is I don't love how he's very inconsistent. It's kind of, I obviously as a Bears fan, I call it the Jay Cutler quality, where some weeks he's just there. He shows up, and when he's hot, he's hot. You can have 4 or 5 weeks where he's just on top of it. He's on fire, having really good weeks, and we saw that kind of early on in the year with him, where his first few games he played South Carolina, Appalachian State, Minnesota, Pittsburgh. He was on fire for those first few weeks, and then he kind of dipped off a little bit, kind of mid-season when they started playing some of those tougher teams, i.e., Miami, University of Miami at number 25. They ended up winning that game, but he had 273 yards, 4 touchdowns, but his completion percentage was down a little bit. But he had a great QBR, so that was he has moments where he can be really good, but I think with him, he's got to have the right team around him, and without the right team around him, he's not going to amount to very much because of the fact that he's more of that Will Levis style quarterback. So I like all the comparisons that you guys made. I think you guys kind of hit it right on the money with Drake May, and I think it kind of falls in line with where my opinion is sort of going. It's just one of those things where he's a really good prospect, and in any other, there's so many good quarterback prospects this year that if you take out a few of them, he would probably be the best. But unfortunately for him, there's too many good ones this year.
I mean, so I have a question for you guys. First, I want to apologize for tripping over my words going through the notes. I was excited. If you guys agree with the Will Levis comparison, do you think Will Levis should have been a first-round pick?
I'm fine with where he was drafted. I'm completely fine
where he was. Yep.
So, yeah, I think where he was drafted was just fine. I like him on the Titans. I think he's a Titans quarterback. It's his place.
I agree. But then my second question, and really the point, then how is Drake May maybe even in the conversation for a top 10 pick? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but I mean,
I don't think it's a 1-to-1. I think that May has a little bit more, like Mason said, when he's hot, he's really hot. I think that, and I didn't watch Levis too much in college, so I probably can't comment too much on that. But I just like Drake May's measurables better. I think that he is a performer. Levis also really worries me with just the way that he plays. I think he's going to have a career-ending injury like any week now. Like, it's ridiculous the runs he's making and stuff. But yeah, I just think Drake May has also, like I said, a lot of the kind of the footwork concerns that I've seen with Caleb Williams, I don't necessarily see with Drake May. I think he's got solid footwork, which I don't see that with some of the other guys, which that's kind of what edges me out in there is I think that base of mechanics is really, really important.
Okay. I mean,
absolutely.
Okay. You want to go ahead?
No, go ahead, Freddie.
I was just going to quickly note, I agree with his footwork is better than Caleb Williams. Anyway.
Absolutely.
We'll see.
Going back to your point, kind of with the Will Levis Drake May comparison, I will say this, that when it comes to like Will Levis feels like, and granted he is the successor to Ryan Tannehill, but He feels like he's going to have kind of a very Ryan Tannehill-esque career. He'll probably play on 1 to 2 teams. I don't think he's going to be a Titan for life. I think he'll have a solid career where guys will look back and they'll say he was solid, but he's not going to be anything elite. Now, I'm not sitting here saying Drake May is going to become anything elite because I think the biggest flaw is, to Jack's point, he hasn't played a lot of tough competition. However, Drake May feels like just that kind of quarterback who he's going to be on a team. He's going to get hot at the right time. He's going to lead him to one Super Bowl. And by the end of his career, he's going to at least have one ring. That may be the difference. Does that make a difference as far as giving him in the top 10? That would be the question. I'd have to look at a little bit more. But Freddie, you bring up a lot of good points for sure.
Yeah, and I probably should have been more clear. It's not necessarily that I think Drake May is going to be very, very good. I just think the rest of this class might not pan out as well as everyone else thinks they will.
Yeah. I think, and that's why I really made this my topic tonight, is that there's so much talk about how good this quarterback class is, and a couple of these guys have no floor. So yeah, all of them, not all of them, a bunch of them could be Hall of Fame guys. They have that potential as prospects. They have that ceiling for a prospect, but most of these guys could easily fail out of the NFL.
Completely.
Yeah.
Well,
Completely.
and what's funny about this, the last few years, we've kind of gotten into this wave with quarterbacks where it feels like there's 5, 6, 7, prospects that are really, really good. And I'd like to point out a lot of them have not been good. And so it's a lot of smoke and mirrors right now. And I think, at least for the three of us, I can't speak for everybody else, but at least for the three of us, I just don't think we're buying it this year.
100%. Yep. And I swear to God, if I hear the word generational talent used one more time, dude, not
Mahomes.
not every player can be a generational talent. That's not how that phrase works. How much of this do you think is set right now? How much do you think can change drastically on that combine day?
I think when you look at some of those prospects, some of the guys we've already mentioned, the Michael Penix, the Jaden Daniels, I think for them it's going to play into their hands a little bit because I think those two are guys that are kind of set up to have some really good pro day, really good combines and stuff like that. So I think for some of those guys that need the help, it's going to do a lot for it. But to your point, a guy like Caleb Williams, it's not gonna bump him down 10 spots if he has a mediocre combine. He's kind of set in stone where he is. But those guys where it's kind of 50-50 where they're going to be, this is their opportunity to really put it down that this is where they're going to get drafted or where they should be drafted nonetheless.
Yeah. I mean, I think you kind of nailed it on the head with those two guys, Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix. Jaden Daniels, I think, could earn the one in the pre-draft process, beating out Bo Nix. Those are my top two. And then I think Penix he has to beat Caleb Williams in his pre-draft process. And I think Caleb Williams could be the fourth quarterback off the board if Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix have good pre-draft processes. And obviously it depends what your teams want to do, what coaching staffs, which guy they like, how meetings go and stuff like that. Caleb Williams, as we already spoke about what he is as a player, these other guys offer something different. So it depends on what the organization wants to do. Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix need to have great pre-draft processes. But the last guy, JJ McCarthy, who we haven't talked about yet, his pre-draft process is going to make a huge difference. He also, to me, his ceiling draft-wise is going to be sort of end of the first round. You want the fifth-year option on the table. And he could go all the way beginning of day 3. So there's a huge range for this guy. And we could talk about him a bit more. But yeah, those three guys need to have great pre-draft processes. Caleb Williams, Drake May, I don't think their film is their film. They're not really going to earn anything in the process.
Totally. Freddie, I'm so glad you brought up JJ McCarthy. That's a guy that I think is in a really interesting situation because he does on paper have the stats we're looking for, some of those measurables we're looking for. He's competing for a national championship right now. My question with JJ McCarthy is how much of his success has been propped up by one of the best offensive lines in the country? I mean, Freddie, you could go, and I've never seen you play football, but pretty sure you could be in the contention if you had those guys blocking for you. I mean, I think he's a really great pro style prospect, and I agree completely. I think his ceiling is super high. We've seen what those pro style quarterbacks from Michigan can do. So, who knows? He could be up there. My only concern is how much of his talent was propped up by the team that he played on, the coaching, the offensive line, and also they didn't really throw the ball that much. Mason, any thoughts on JJ McCarthy?
I like JJ McCarthy. He's not a guy that's going to sit there and set the world on fire, but he's a guy that does a good job of kind of protecting the football, and he's a guy that would fit in well on any team that's got a solid defense. I mean, he is perfect for Michigan football, right? He's the Jim McMahon type where if he can hand the ball off and keep the football in their hands, he's doing just fine. And that's the kind of guy that JJ McCarthy's going to be for you. Is he's going to be a hand it off type guy. He's going to be a protect the football type guy. So he's a guy that I'm actually really interested to. I'm interested to see him in the college football playoff, and I'm interested to see his pre-draft process because there's not a ton of info that I have on him. The biggest thing that I know that I like is the fact that he's a very good protector of the football. It'll be interesting to see how he does over these next couple of games. I imagine that Michigan beats Alabama, but that's a story for another day. But these next two games, if he's playing in both of them, are going to be very important for him to try and raise his draft stock and prove that he's not just a product of a good defense and a solid offensive line, that he really is something that people should be vying for in the NFL.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, my comparison for him is Kirk Cousins. And I'm yet to see him really throw a ton
Nailed
of
it.
deep balls, but like passable athleticism needs to touch up his accuracy where he is right now. But he can go through progressions already. He's, competent when creative, nothing crazy, but he can get the job done. And it's just game manager, as you guys were saying. So he has a lot to show in the pre-draft process, but that's sort of like, Kirk Cousins, I think and Minnesota, the Vikings.
He'd actually fit perfectly in Minnesota.
He would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be a
Slide right
perfect
in.
landing spot for him.
And
Yeah.
he could be there end of the first round. So
I'd like to make it known. I mentioned that he had just the 4 interceptions this year. 3 of those came in one game where they won 31-6 against Bowling Green. So if you take that game out, right? You take that game out minus 2 touchdowns, so he had 17 touchdowns on 1 interception. Not a bad season for the starter at Michigan. What we saw out of McCarthy was a lot of guys where a lot of those big games, the Penn State game, the Ohio State game, those were games that they were close. I mean, the Penn State game, it was a 9-point game at the end, but that was a close game for most of it. And the biggest thing he did was he didn't give the game away. What's most important is in both of those games, he's got no turnovers. And now the Penn State game, he got hurt. So you can take that game kind of out of the equation. But look, my biggest thing, he doesn't turn the ball over. It's a big plus. He's the best game manager quarterback you could probably ask for in this class.
Yeah. And that's why I just want to reiterate his pre-draft process determines where Drake May falls into play. But Drake May could go as low on my board as the 6th quarterback. So that could still be first round. There's a lot of problems in the NFL right now. Some coaching, we've already been through all that. But yeah, I think okay.
All right, gentlemen, do we have anything else tonight?
Unless we want to do bets.
Oh, dude, we didn't even talk about bets. Yeah, everyone should have at least one bet. Yeah. All right, Freddie, go ahead. What's your bet for the week?
Oh, man. So I didn't prepare anything yet, but just looking at the NFL schedule, back to the stuff I know. Oh, man. I guess I'll take Breece Hall to score a touchdown and go over 40 yards against the Commanders.
I like that.
I will take Jerome Ford over 40 yards against the Texans.
Okay.
I don't want to touch a winner in that game, though. I'm going to take the Panthers defense to score. This I actually did prepare. I'm going to Panthers defense to score against the Packers. Last week I had some success with the Bears defense. I'm going with the Panthers defense this week against the Packers. Colts Falcons, that's winnable for the Colts. Talking about some of in that Browns AFC playoff conversation, but I don't want to bet on that. Oh man, there are so many tight matchups this week that it's really tough to find good bets. I might leave it at that. I might leave it at just a couple of touchdown scores. That's it.
I like it, man. I like it. I've only got one bet this week, and that is I'm looking into next week, the Holiday Bowl, Louisville at USC. Louisville's favored by 7.5. Hammer that. I'm thinking about taking an alternate and just taking 10.5 or something like that. USC doesn't have a quarterback. They don't have their running back. They don't have Brandon Rice. I don't think they have a team left. So Louisville should blow past USC. I'm thinking at least 2 scores.
Okay, I like that. That's gonna be a good game to watch. Maybe have to see if we'll have to see what happens.
We will.
Now, as far as my picks go, first things first, I'd like to make it known that Mitchell Trubisky and Russell Wilson won me a hearty $400 something this weekend for both getting rushing touchdowns. It was a stressful Saturday night for myself, but I want to thank Russell Wilson for coming in clutch, and I want to thank the NFL referees for calling some interesting plays in that whole sequence where he finally got the touchdown. Now, that being said, this week I don't really have a lock that I love. However, there is a couple plays that I am a big fan of. Now, number one being the Detroit Lions at -3.5. There's a lot of people that would argue against this. There's a lot of people that are high on the Vikings right now, and you've got the Vikings who are scrapping for everything they're at 7-7. But the Lions kind of were able to get their group back a little bit last week, and they're sitting at a hearty 10-4 right now, and they played a very good Broncos team, in my opinion. I think that they're going to have the advantage over the Vikings this weekend, and I think that they're easily going to be able to cover on that game. Now, the other one that I'm looking forward to, there is a couple. I was taking a look at some of the over-unders, and I think that there's a few that might be a little too high. I like the Colt. I like having an under on the Colts Falcons at 44.5. That one feels kind of 50-50. It depends on what Colts team you're getting that day, and it also depends on what Saints team you're getting that day. Now, the Saints are a team that it feels like it's impossible for them to score over 20 points, so you have that on your side, but you'll have to wait and see whether or not it kind of pans out. There's a couple others that are a little bit low, but most of those do make sense. The one that I like the most, that I think is the most interesting, is actually 43.5, the Cardinals-Bears game. Now, the Bears have been very inconsistent about how many points they're going to score and also about how many points they're going to give up. However, the Cardinals have been kind of getting better on offense a little bit. They've been scoring about 20 points a game. I think that's going to be a good game. I think you're looking at probably, a 31-28 sort of style game. And usually when these two teams get together, it's a high scoring game. I can say the last few times they've played, they've covered this line. So I do also like the 43.5 over on the Bears Cardinals. That being said, that's pretty much all I have as far as bets on Sunday.
Mason, I want to attack one of your bets, but when I do so, I'm going to double down on my conspiracy theory. So,
Okay.
I'm going to attack the Lions and Broncos notes. The Lions have to use Jahmyr Gibbs or Dan Campbell is fired. Lions fans will lose their mind. And Jahmyr Gibbs is primarily an outside runner. He averaged like 10 yards per carry attacking those off-tackle runs that I spoke about last week before the game. And I don't know why teams stopped doing that. I don't think the Broncos fixed their problems, and I don't think the Lions are back to normal either. I just think how the matchups lined up, the NFL couldn't tell Dan Campbell not to call off tackle runs because that would be way too suspicious. By the way, Jahmyr Gibbs only carried the ball 11 times. I don't know what that's about. He ran a couple of those, I think, were between the tackles. He still did a good job, but I just had to double down on my conspiracy theory, and yeah, it was just an opportunity. So
I like it.
No, those are all fair. Those are all fair points. I think what works in the Lions' favor, though, is, and this is one of those things you wouldn't believe we're saying it about the Lions, but they have been good enough to where, even if they're not at like that kind of 100%, like their offense has been sort of so high fly, score so much. They got as far as points for, they're fifth ranked in points scored per game. So their offense, they're scoring a lot of points. Right now, it feels like the Vikings offense is kind of like reeling. Let's not forget the fact that they only scored 3 points in a 3-0 win 2 weeks ago. So this feels like a game, I said it with the Eagles game a couple weeks ago, but it feels like once again a game where if the Lions can get out ahead and they can get in control of this one, this is one that they're easily going to win. But again, the Vikings have to be able to keep up. If this is, if the Lions are scoring 28 to 31 points, I'm taking the Lions every single time this week.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And maybe that actually gave me an idea. Maybe Ty Chandler to go over 40 yards for the Vikings running back. Throwing that out there. All right, just had to be wild a little bit.
I like it. All right, guys. I think we've gone a little long. We apologize for that. Thank you again for joining us for another episode of Film Facts Stats. Again, this is brought to you by Back Sports Page. You can listen to us on any of the major podcast providers, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next week.